All right, so you ready to dive into another deep dive?
Yeah, let's do it.
Today we're looking at a world where charisma and controversy, well, they kind of like go hand in hand,
Mm-hmm.
where the line between a visionary and a con artist, it can be super thin.
Yeah.
And today we're asking, grifter or gifted, as we unpack the life of one of history's most notorious figures.
You talking Al Capone?
Yeah, Al Capone.
Oh, wow.
This guy was fascinating.
He really is.
So when you think about it, his life really embodies that whole question, grifter or gifted.
Yeah, for sure.
This is a man who built a criminal empire during Prohibition,
Uh-huh.
pulling in an estimated $100 million a year.
Crazy, right?
I mean, was that a twisted form of entrepreneurial genius, or was he just a master manipulator who exploited a loophole? I mean, $100 million a year.
It's a lot of dough.
That's a level of success I think most legitimate businesses only dream of.
It's true.
But here's what I find so interesting about him. His early life wasn't exactly a hotbed of criminal masterminds. Born in Brooklyn to Italian immigrant parents, his beginnings were surprisingly ordinary.
Well, except for getting expelled at 14 for, hitting a teacher.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He decked a teacher.
Yeah.
I guess even a future mob boss has to start
You're
somewhere.
going to start somewhere.
And of course, we can't forget about the incident that earned him the nickname Scarface, a brawl where he was slashed across the face.
Gave him that distinctive look.
I mean, it's these little details that I think when you look back on a life like this, you start to see maybe a pattern, maybe a glimpse into the man behind the myth.
Yeah, so right there.
I mean, do you think these early experiences shaped his trajectory?
Oh, absolutely. They point to a willingness to use force, a disregard for authority,
Yeah.
and, maybe even a hint of that rebellious streak that would later define his public image.
Yeah, like he really cultivated that.
He did.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
How did this seemingly ordinary kid transform into the infamous Al Capone?
All right, so let's go back.
Rewind a little bit.
Yeah, Capone's moved to Chicago to join Johnny Torrio's gang.
This was like the big time.
This was a pivotal moment. He was stepping into the big leagues of organized crime.
Yeah, and what's interesting here is that Torrio, he wasn't your stereotypical old school gangster.
Like out of a movie.
Right, exactly. Right.
No, he represented this new breed of criminal one who understood the power of legitimacy. Businesses, respectable front, orchestrating this vast criminal enterprise behind the scenes.
Kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, totally. And Capone learned this approach from Torrio, eventually taking over the Chicago outfit when Torrio retired after an attempt on his life.
Yeah, so Prohibition hits America, and suddenly there's this massive demand for booze. I mean, Capone famously said, "I am just a businessman giving the people what they want."
Classic Capone.
Was he simply filling a need, or did he manipulate the system, creating a demand through his illegal activities? I mean, you have to admit there's a certain logic to his argument.
Yeah, well, it's the classic debate.
Right.
Is he a savvy entrepreneur meeting a market demand, or a criminal mastermind profiting from a crisis he helped create?
I mean, he was really good at what he did, illegal or not.
Oh, yeah. But, we can't overlook the brutality that underpinned this whole operation. I mean, remember, Capone's businesses involved illegal production and distribution,
Right.
often enforced through violence.
Yeah.
So it's a mixed bag for sure.
Yeah, he's got this whole, like, I'm a benevolent provider kind of vibe going on, giving the people what they want.
Right.
And then you have events like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, a chilling reminder of the violence that defined his reign.
Chilling is right.
Can you briefly walk us through what happened?
All right, so picture this, February 14th, 1929.
Okay, Valentine's Day.
7 members of the rival Northside gang are gunned down in a garage,
Oh, wow.
executed by hitmen disguised as police officers.
That's brutal.
The brutality was shocking, even for Chicago in the Roaring '20s.
I bet. And while Capone had an alibi, the public and media, they immediately pointed the finger at him.
Yeah, who else would it be?
This was a turning point, wasn't it? It solidified his reputation as public enemy number one.
Absolutely. The massacre shattered any illusions of Capone as a charming rogue.
Yeah, this wasn't just a little bit of roughhousing.
Right. This was a blatant act of violence, a power move that sent shockwaves through the city and the nation.
You think it changed things for him too? Like internally?
I mean, who knows, but it definitely signaled a shift in the government's approach to dealing with Capone.
Things were about to get real.
They were now determined to bring him down no matter the cost.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's where things get really interesting. The government, for all its resources, couldn't convict Capone on the charges they really wanted.
Like what? What were they going for?
Racketeering, Murder the stuff that formed the backbone of his empire.
It's almost like he was Teflon coated, like nothing would stick to him.
Right, but they got him on something that seems almost mundane in comparison.
What?
Tax evasion.
Are you kidding?
I know, right? Think about that for a second. This man who built his fortune on illegal booze gambling violence ultimately tripped up on something as ordinary as taxes.
It's like poetic justice or something. So walk me through this. How did they build the case?
Okay, so they brought in Elliot Ness
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this guy.
and his team, the Untouchables, to go after Capone's financial records.
Okay.
And they painstakingly pieced together his income, proving that he had failed to report millions of dollars in earnings.
Oh, man. I bet he thought they were bluffing. Like, this is a joke.
After evading so many other charges, he must have felt invincible.
Untouchable.
Exacts.
But the tax man always gets his cut.
Always.
So what happened? Did he go to trial?
There's a good chance he underestimated the seriousness of tax evasion. Or maybe, as you said, he felt invincible. Either way, Capone attempted to negotiate a plea deal, assuming he'd get off with a slap on the wrist.
Oh, no, I bet that backfired spectacularly.
Big time. The judge threw the book at him, sentencing him to 11 years in federal prison. 11 years.
Suddenly, the man who had ruled Chicago with an iron fist was just another inmate.
Wow, where did they send him? Alcatraz.
You got it, Alcatraz? The infamous maximum security prison.
That's hardcore.
No more lavish parties, no more power plays from behind a mahogany desk. Capone was stripped of his privileges, isolated from his empire, and forced to confront the consequences of his actions.
That must have been a harsh reality check. So did he serve his full 11 years?
He ended up serving 6.5 years, released early due to his deteriorating health.
What happened?
He had contracted syphilis years earlier, and it had progressed significantly during his time in prison.
Oh, wow. So the man who had everything, money, power, influence, ultimately lost it all, succumbing to a disease and the consequences of his own choices. I mean, there's a real Shakespearean tragedy to his downfall, isn't there?
There is. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the fleeting nature of power, the price of ambition, and the human cost of a life built on violence and exploitation. Yeah, for sure. And speaking of human cost, we've been focusing on Capone's criminal enterprise, but what about his personal life?
Right.
Was he capable of genuine relationships? Did he have a family?
He did. At 19, he married May Coughlin.
Okay.
And get this, she was Irish Catholic.
Interesting.
Which is interesting considering, he was running an Italian ob.
Yeah, that is interesting.
They had a son together, Albert Francis, nicknamed Sonny.
Okay.
And by all accounts, their marriage was strong, lasting throughout his criminal career and his subsequent decline.
So like a ride or die kind of situation.
It seems that way.
I mean, that's surprising, isn't it? The idea of a loving husband and doting father. It doesn't exactly fit the image of a ruthless mob boss.
It creates a real dissonance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You have this brutal figure orchestrating violence and intimidation, yet seemingly capable of genuine affection and devotion to his family. It makes you question the simplistic labels we often apply to historical figures.
It really does. It adds another layer to that central question, grifter or gifted. Was he a man driven by circumstance, forced into a life of crime, or was there an inherent darkness within him that no amount of family love could erase?
And it raises another intriguing point. Capone was known for his charitable acts.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
Particularly during the Great Depression, he opened soup kitchens feeding thousands of hungry people in Chicago.
That's right. Capone's soup kitchen.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like he was trying to atone for his sins in a way.
It's hard to say what his motivations were.
Right.
Some might argue it was a calculated move to bolster his public image. A way to soften his edges and gain a measure of support from the community he was terrorizing.
I could see that.
Others might see it as genuine compassion, a recognition of the suffering around him, and a desire to alleviate it even if it was fueled by ill-gotten gains.
So was it a cynical ploy for good PR, or was there a flicker of genuine altruism in the heart of this notorious gangster?
It's a tough one to call.
It seems like every time we peel back a layer of the Capone myth, we find more questions than answers.
That's the thing about history. It's rarely neat and tidy.
True.
People are complex, their motivations are layered, and their actions often defy easy categorization.
Right.
Capone's story forces us to grapple with these complexities, to question our assumptions about good and evil, and to recognize the gray areas that exist in between.
I like that. And perhaps that's where the real insight lies.
Yeah.
It's not about definitively labeling him as a grifter or gifted, but about understanding the forces that shaped him,
Uh-huh.
the choices he made, and the lasting impact of his actions on both his city and American history.
You got it. His story, and all its contradictions and complexities, offers a glimpse into a turbulent era,
Okay.
a time of social and economic upheaval where traditional values clashed with a burgeoning modern world.
So he was like a symbol of the changing times.
Capone, in many ways, embodies that clash, and his rise and fall serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of both power and the social fabric.
Okay, so we have this multifaceted figure, a ruthless criminal, a family man, a philanthropist, all rolled into one past.
How did he manage to hold on to power for so long? I mean, was it purely through fear and intimidation?
Well, fear was definitely a factor.
I bet.
But Capone was also a master manipulator. He understood that power wasn't just about brute force.
Yeah.
It was about control, influence, and perception.
He famously said, "I'm a businessman giving the people what they want."
Right.
Almost like he was positioning himself as a public servant,
Yeah.
filling a need that the government itself had created.
And that's the brilliance of his strategy. He tapped into a vein of public sentiment, resentment towards prohibition and this romanticization of the outlaw. He provided a service, albeit it's an illegal one, and many people were willing to turn a blind eye to his methods as long as the booze kept flowing.
I guess as long as they're getting what they want. Who cares how it happens, right?
Exactly.
But it went deeper than that, didn't it? I mean, he had politicians and law enforcement officials on his payroll?
Oh, yeah, he did. I mean, he was really solidifying his grip on the city.
Further solidifying his grip.
It wasn't just about muscle. It was about creating a system where he was untouchable.
He understood the power of networks,
Right.
of loyalty, of having people in your pocket. And he wasn't afraid to use those connections to his advantage.
Whether it was bribing officials, intimidating witnesses, or manipulating the media.
It was all part of the game.
Speaking of the media, let's talk about Capone's relationship with the press. I mean, he was a media sensation, wasn't he?
Oh, he was all over the place.
Always in the headlines, often portrayed as this larger-than-life figure.
He was a master of self-promotion.
Really?
Yeah, he understood the power of the press and knew how to use it to his advantage. He gave interviews, posed for photographs, even had a publicist crafting his image.
It's like he was a celebrity gangster.
He was?
Did he actively cultivate this public persona, or was this something the media created?
It was a bit of both. The media was hungry for stories about Capone, and he was happy to feed that hunger. He presented himself as a charming rogue, a man of the people, even a Robin Hood figure.
And for a time, that image really worked in his favor.
It did. People were fascinated by him, even as they feared him.
Right.
It's almost like he was a living contradiction.
Yeah.
A brutal criminal who somehow managed to charm his way into the public consciousness.
But that carefully crafted image was shattered, wasn't it?
It was.
The St. Valentine's Day Massacre changed everything.
Everything. It exposed the brutality at the heart of Capone's empire.
Right. No amount of charm or media manipulation could erase the stain of that massacre.
Nope. It was a turning point both for Capone's public image and for the government's determination to bring him down.
So in a way, Capone was a victor of his own success. The more powerful he became, the more scrutiny he attracted, and ultimately that scrutiny led to his downfall.
There's a lesson there, isn't there?
Yeah.
About the limits of power, the dangers of hubris, and the inevitability of consequences, even for someone who seemed untouchable.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Capone's rise to power, his criminal empire, his family life, his charitable acts, his manipulation of the media, and his eventual downfall.
Right.
It's a story filled with contradictions, complexities, and a healthy dose of what-ifs.
Yeah.
But now we come back to that central question.
All right.
Grifter or gifted? After all this, where do you stand?
It's not an easy question to answer.
Right.
Capone was undoubtedly a shrewd businessman, a master manipulator, and a charismatic leader. He saw an opportunity and he exploited it, building an empire on illegal activities while carefully cultivating a public persona that masked the brutality at the heart of his operation.
So was he a product of his time?
He was a product of his time, but he also helped shape that time.
Interesting.
His story is a reminder that history isn't just about dates and events.
Right.
It's about the choices people make, the consequences of those choices, and the enduring impact they have on the world around them.
And in fact, that's the most valuable takeaway from this deep dive.
I think so.
Capone's story challenges us to look beyond simplistic labels,
Yeah.
to grapple with the complexities of human nature, and to recognize that the line between grifter and gifted can be blurry, even in the face of overwhelming evidence.
It's not always black and white.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we should always be questioning, always be seeking deeper understanding, and always be wary of those who wield power, no matter how charming or charismatic they may seem.
Well said. Capone's story, for all its darkness and tragedy, offers a valuable lesson in critical thinking, ethical awareness, and the importance of holding those in power accountable for their actions.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the life and times of Al Capone. You've been an incredible guide, helping us navigate the twists and turns of his story and shedding light on the many layers of this complex and controversial figure. It's been a wild ride unpacking the life and legacy of Al Capone. He was a man who seemed to operate in the shadows, yet he was constantly in the public eye. It makes you wonder how much of Capone's image was carefully constructed and how much was media hype.
You hit the nail on the head. It really gets to the heart of Capone's genius, if you can call it that. He was one of the first gangsters to truly understand the power of public relations.
Yeah.
Remember, this was the golden age of newspapers,
Right.
and Capone, he knew how to play the game.
So he wasn't just a mob boss, he was a media manipulator.
Right.
How did he control the narrative?
He was a master of spin. He cultivated relationships with reporters, gave carefully staged interviews, and even hired a publicist to manage his image.
Wow.
He wanted to be seen as a man of the people,
Mm.
a benevolent benefactor, even a Robin Hood figure.
And it worked, didn't it? I mean, for a time at least, he was portrayed as this charming rogue, a gangster with a heart of gold. Did the public buy into this image?
To a certain extent, yes. People were fascinated by him. He represented a kind of rebellious spirit, a defiance of authority, especially during Prohibition, when many saw the government as overreaching.
So he tapped into a vein of anti-establishment sentiment. But he also played up his charitable side right. The soup kitchens, the donations, it all contributed to this image of a gangster with a conscience.
Absolutely. He understood that public perception wasn't just about power and intimidation. It was also about creating a sense of goodwill, a feeling that he was somehow giving back to the community he was exploiting.
It's almost like he was trying to have it both ways, be the feared gangster and the beloved benefactor. But how long could he sustain that facade?
Well, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre shattered that illusion. It was a brutal reminder of the violence that underpinned his empire. No amount of spin could erase the stain of that event.
Right. It exposed the dark underbelly of his operation. The public, the media, even the government could no longer ignore the truth about Capone. He became public enemy number one.
Exactly. The massacre marked a turning point. It became a symbol of everything that was wrong with organized crime and a rallying cry for law enforcement to bring Capone down.
So in a sense, his carefully constructed image was his undoing. The higher he climbed, the harder he fell.
There's a lesson there, isn't there? About the limits of manipulation, the power of truth, and the inevitability of consequences. You can control the narrative for a while, but eventually reality has a way of catching up.
And in Capone's case, reality was brutal and unforgiving. His story is a cautionary tale, but it's also a fascinating study in human nature, ambition, and the complex relationship between power and perception. What do you think for our listeners out there trying to navigate a world where charisma and controversy often collide? How can they separate the visionaries from the con artists, the true innovators, from those just looking to make a quick buck?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. But I think Capone's story offers some valuable insights.
Okay, I'm listening.
Look beyond the surface, question the motives, and don't be swayed by charm or charisma alone.
Right, it's easy to fall for that.
It is. Dig deeper, examine the actions, and consider the long-term consequences. Are they truly making the world a better place, or are they just lining their own pockets?
It's about critical thinking, about informed skepticism, about not taking things at face value. And perhaps most importantly, it's about recognizing that even the most charismatic figures can have a dark side.
Well said. Capone's legacy serves as a constant reminder that we must be vigilant, discerning, and always willing to challenge the narratives presented to us.
Well, this deep dive into Al Capone's life has been eye-opening, to say the least. It's a story that continues to resonate, reminding us of the complexities of human nature, the allure of power, and the importance of critical thinking in a world saturated with information and spin.
It's been a pleasure unpacking this with you. Remember, in a world where grifters and the gifted often wear the same mask, the ability to discern the difference is more important than ever.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the enduring legacy of Al Capone. Was he a visionary or a villain, a product of his time, or a manipulator of it? The answer, as we've seen, is far from simple. But the questions themselves are worth asking, and the insights we gain from exploring these complexities are invaluable. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and those critical thinking caps on.